Want to hear something a little spooky, something existentially alarming and empowering, something bizarrely logical? I didn't, but I thought about it anyway, so now you get to deal with it too. Let me tell you why curiosity is both my best and worst trait. I was bored, so I decided I would do something novel and ask ChatGPT to discuss something very difficult with me. It decided to bring up the concept of quantum entanglement. I asked for the questions and ended up learning about things like the double slit experiment. Very cool stuff, but also annoyingly complicated. If you're one of those people concerned about the use of AI, I'm aware ChatGPT can be wrong, so for the purpose of this video, I did just enough research to confirm the logic of what it was telling me. It honestly made me hate how incapable scientists are of using plain language to describe something. Too much technical jargon, too many terms, kinda sucks. To save everybody mountains of trouble, I'm gonna explain these ideas as simply as possible, because understanding them is important for later. A superposition describes a state of existence where the thing in question exists in multiple possible states simultaneously rather than a single definite state. The thought experiment of Schrodinger's cat is a famous analogy that really highlights the bizarreness of this concept. The thing in question, the cat locked inside a closed box, exists as both dead and alive until the box is opened and it is observed. The observation of it forces the cat to exist as either dead or alive, since it cannot fully exist as both. This is not literally how everything exists, but that's probably the simplest way to understand the logic of what a superposition is. Then there's the observer effect. When a superposition is observed, this is called a collapse. This web of possibilities collapses into a single observable state. This phenomenon is actually testable and documented, which is probably the weirdest part of quantum mechanics as a whole, because it kind of implies that the act of observation or measurement is somehow interacting with the superpositions themselves. It makes it seem a lot more, tangible than people might assume. I made this visual aid, very professional. The object in question would be a particle. And as you can see that objects have these sorts of, the easiest way to explain it is to just say that they exist as possibilities. This object is one thing, but it exists within all the possibilities that it could be. And then when we observe it, with our eyeball, this is an eyeball by the way, with our eyeballs, it has to pick a direction to go because I honestly don't know why. It's just one of those weird quirks of reality, I guess. We observe it, our observation cements it into a pathway. And that pathway that it cements into is what we measure. Lastly is quantum entanglement. This is the idea that two particles can become intertwined with each other so closely that they instantly correlate with each other regardless of the amount of space between them. If one of these correlated particles collapses due to observation, both particles will collapse at the same exact time into corresponding or equal or relevant states. They'll both collapse at the same time, even if only one of them is observed. There's no evidence to suggest that information is being transmitted between them, so it's kind of just a mystery for the time being. This is also testable and documented, which makes it like twice as weird, at least. That's the end of the definitions. Continuing where I left off, I asked a bunch of different questions and started to wonder why. Why does this occur? How far does this reach? What does it mean? I wanted to know everything I could, and it led me to reach many different conclusions over the course of a few days. I thought about it almost nonstop. You know, in the span of an evening, I had learned about basic quantum mechanics. I learned about what Schrodinger's cat actually represented, because I had heard it before, but I didn't know like what the point was. And once I actually internally understood the concept of a superposition, I began to wonder what that meant for the rest of reality. You know, if the basic particles of the universe act in such a bizarre way, what does this mean for everything else? Now, before I discuss anything really crazy, I'm going to preface this by saying that everything after this point is completely theoretical. I'm making stuff up. Well, not really, but you know, I'm piecing it together myself. These are all theories. I can't prove any of it. I don't have the technology or the knowledge or the expertise. I probably can't even test for a lot of it yet. So we're running off of theoretical assumptions here. You know, I'm not a scientist or a physicist or an expert. I was simply curious about, you know, where this logic goes. You know, what does it mean? So I used my own personal intuition and went basically as far as I could. First I thought, well, that must mean that multiple universes exist, right? Technically, no. Just like the electron that's tested in these quantum experiments, there will only be one universe existing in multiple different states at once. Us right now in this world, we would be one version of this universe. Okay, so then the next question is, well, how can we look for these alternate timelines? I'm going to use the word timelines because that's probably the closest word I can think of. Well, we can't look for these timelines because observing a timeline would cause the rest to cease existing. This train of thought right here, this right here is what sparked my craziest thought. What if we are already living in the timeline that succeeded in observing itself? What if the entire universe we're in is the one that managed to observe itself? This implies that at some point, conscious being, whether human or not, observed the universe. It collapsed the web of possibilities that was the universe and sealed us into the end goal of universal self-awareness. The more I thought about it, the more likely it seemed. Let me ask a very poignant question. Fun word, poignant. How come we haven't destroyed ourselves yet? What is preventing so many near disasters from occurring? You know, we always talk about nukes. Why haven't they flown? Well, it could be because our reality is the one that succeeded. Since we can see that time is a relative, is not constant, I think we can theorize that time maybe exists in a similar way to a superposition does. You know, maybe the past, present, and future are all existing at the same time. Things feel lucky because they are lucky sometimes. We are already in the lucky version of the universe. And once I thought about that, everything that I knew, everything that I thought was pretty certain, kind of started to fall apart. You know, I started to wonder, like, what else is going on? What else could be going on? What about all these extra details hidden beneath the surface? Something that was presented to me was the idea that some people believe there is some sort of quantum mechanics involved in the creation of our own consciousness. I think that's actually probably true, even if we can't prove it, if it can't be, you know, scientifically proven just yet. If consciousness is purely electrical signals, why have we not figured it out? surely somebody somewhere would have mapped out what consciousness looks like, and theoretically, computers would be able to recreate it if it were just electricity and information. There are also a lot of strange phenomena that are normally difficult to explain. Some interesting tidbits of reality here coming up. How do some people believe in their illness to the point that they exhibit symptoms? I don't remember if this is Munchausen's or hypochondriac or what. One of those. But and then also, why does the placebo effect exist? Which is probably really key, actually, because the placebo effect is accounted for in medication trials. It's kind of like a gold standard to account for it through things like double-blind tests. It's these tests, they account for the idea that belief that you're taking the medication can produce benefits, which is, if you even take you just take 5 seconds to think about that. That is crazy. That's just crazy. It's basically the most hard-coded proof we have of belief having an effect. And people theorize, why do we believe? Why does belief change these things? But it's not explained fully, because a lot of explanations stop at, well, if you believe it, then your body releases chemicals, hormones, whatever. But there's a link missing. It's like, where does the belief translate to the physical, the physical, I don't know, symptom? There has to be some mechanism that belief utilizes that has an impact on, at the very, very least, our own internal world, our own body. Another thing, how come people say mind over matter? A very specific saying, pretty consistent. There are different versions of it depending on where you look. And another thing, why is changing your mindset the first step to enacting change in your life? Which links to things like cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a very common type of therapy for people to use, to recommend, to practice, because it's proven to be pretty effective. And really, the only process in cognitive behavioral therapy is training your brain to undo certain thought habits and thought processes, which changes your outlook. And then the going theory, I guess, is that because your mindset has changed, your perspective has also changed, and the choices that you make will change because of that, necessarily. And yeah, probably, but why does that? Why does your mindset have any effect at all? And it makes me think maybe our consciousness has a lot more tangible influence than we think it does. Perhaps our personal realities are not really that fixed. Let's assume, for the sake of theory, that consciousness does involve quantum mechanics of some kind. The only person who knows your internal experience is you, which means that you are the only observer of it. It is yours to change however you like, so long as it exists within the web of possibilities, the superposition that is your life. This means you won't be developing any superpowers, obviously, but it does mean that you can actively choose to live your best possible life. The only thing you really need to do is believe that you can. Experienced therapists will tell you that the things people believe about their lives are the things that tend to come true. It is such a prevalent phenomenon that there's a whole mode of therapy dedicated to it. It's called cognitive behavioral therapy. The idea that you are reworking your thought patterns to enact change in your lifestyle. It's very common, very reputable, well known, and it's usually very effective. It is my thought that what we are doing when we believe something about ourselves is much like what happens when you try to observe an electron's path. Once you pick a path, the web of possibilities, the superposition, collapses, and only once you pick a different path does this change. Our impact on ourselves, on our society, on reality itself seemed more significant the more thought I put into it. I started to think that the only real constant in the universe is change. Everywhere you look, there's change, and change will occur whether you want it to or not. I would say change can be loosely described as entropy, in a very loose, very fluid, if you will, way. And one of the foundational rules of thermodynamics is that entropy always increases. Heat spreads, energy flows, whatever. If we follow this idea, our observation of things is what forces something to effectively pick a path out of the web of possibilities. This means that we have to be able to observe it for it to exist as it does. The mere recording, measurement, memory, or thought of something is what contributes to its existence, kind of creates it. In order to observe something, anything, we have to be able to fit it into a context that allows us to understand how something has changed and why we think it did. Take a second to think about it, process it, understand it. How do we observe things in the world? We measure it. We record it. We think about it. We talk about it. Whether it's an actual measurement or just our experience of it, doesn't matter. Then we compare it to other similar things we have observed. If I see a butterfly, I'm internally comparing it to other butterflies I've seen, which is how I can tell what type it is. I look at the color, I look at the patterns, the size, the proportions, all of these things that are relevant to figure out what the butterfly is. Other people may see the butterfly and compare it to other bugs that they've seen, just to confirm that it is a butterfly, because that's all they're looking for. The only reason we can tell what we're looking at when we look at the butterfly in this example is because there are very slowly changing variables, the things like the color, the patterns, the size, life, every physical characteristic. These are slowly changing through the process of evolution. And because these are slowly changing, they branch off and they make all these different species of butterflies, we can look at each of these attributes and use them to differentiate the different species of butterflies. And the only way we can really tell the difference between butterflies is because they have changed. And so, in theory, all of our observations have to be based on kind of rule of change, where to even observe it, it has to have changed. Because if it doesn't change, then it can't be observed, because there's no context to observe it with. In theory, everything in our observable reality must experience change for us to be able to observe it. With this in mind, I think the universe will probably never stop changing. I don't think there's going to be heat death or an implosion or any definite endpoint like that. It doesn't seem very likely. Seems, kind of seems like an inevitability with the logic that we're working with. Because, if entropy always increases, heat always disperses, then heat death makes sense. Sure, whatever. I think instead that, much like life on Earth does, the universe will hit a wall and adapt and overcome its limits to change further, because change seems kind of like the only universal truth. Mean everything. I'm also going to suggest that we can't really know what the universe will do, because all the laws we use to discern reality, all of gravity, thermodynamics, time, whatever, all of these things exist inside the universe. This would be like trying to use the rules of a video game to figure out how the operating system it's running on works. It doesn't seem feasible at all, to me at least. So, the next question is, what are the limits? If reality is a constantly shifting creation of our own observation, why are there limits? I think the answer is that many things are now outside the web of possibilities. They are no longer within reality. You cannot do things that are impossible because they are just that. They're impossible. With each observation we make, we compound upon reality and narrow the range of possibilities. Think of rolling a dice. A dice can land on a number between 1 and 6. If you take one of those faces and change them into a different number or a duplicate number that's already there, you've changed the web of possibilities for the outcomes you can get when you roll that dice. Certain things are outside the limitations of the reality we have observed up until this point because of the observations we have made in the past. Each choice we make creates direction, and that direction limits the range of futures. I feel that this applies to everything, even personal choices. Seems pretty obvious. Duh. Every choice I make impacts my future. But here. What if it didn't just impact it? What if it was the core part, the whole picture of what is actively creating my future, what's shaping it into reality? It's kind of a subtle distinction, but I feel it's really important to make. It means our futures could be a lot more fluid than we think, and it gives our choices a lot more power, a lot more meaning than they would otherwise have. It makes me feel like my choices are actually very meaningful. I think it makes everybody's actions meaningful. One thing that puzzled me for a while was how the concept of time fits into this logic. Why does time seem to be so immovable, so constant, even when everything else has changed? This led me to start considering that time is not just some random consequence of entropy. It's actually one of the most key parts of the universe. I thought that time must be so consistent because it was likely the first part of reality to solidify, so to speak. Every conscious being observes the passage of time, so it is effectively the foundation we stand on. In order for any of us to observe change, there has to be passage of time so that we can compare the past state to the present state. Therefore, I think it's reasonable to assume that time cannot be altered in any way that would hinder the observation of change. If change cannot be observed without time, then you shouldn't be able to do anything weird to it, because it would make observation impossible, and it would probably destabilize reality pretty hard. This would necessarily mean that time is kind of like a measurement of change in a very abstract way. Continuing further, time is proven to be relative, not a fixed attribute of reality. If we assume that we have observed the universe in the future, we or some other life form, which collapsed us into this version of reality, then we can assume that our continued existence is proof that we are on the correct or lucky path. This path that's been created for us not only guarantees that the universe will be observed and collapse into this reality, it also implies that we have lived out many different realities at once. If reality was a superposition at one point, then each one of us has lived out many different, probably infinite amounts of lives at once. If we follow the theory that some kind of quantum processes create consciousness inside the brain, or inside the neurons in our brain, then it stands to reason that our consciousness is subject to experience other quantum mechanics. The important one being quantum entanglement. When a single reality was collapsed into the only path forward, every version of ourselves also collapsed into this version of ourselves. This naturally begs the question, what kinds of experiences did those other versions of ourselves carry over? Did they carry over anything? Does it explain certain oddities about human experience? Would it explain things like deja vu, gut feelings, random precognition, the Mandela effect, maybe even dreams? You're gonna go that far with it? That's a pretty strange train of thought to follow, but it seems like a possibility within this this kind of logic. At this point, I had completely undermined my entire understanding of reality. I was so curious, so intrigued, so stimulated by this concept that I just had to take it as far as I possibly could. I plugged everything I had thought back into ChatGPT. I paid for it. I used their whatever research review they're doing at the moment. And I asked it to try and poke as many holes as possible in this framework as it possibly could. And I did it multiple times because I wanted to be extra sure. It asked me a lot of different questions that posed a lot of different possibilities. My biggest issue is that I could not find a place where this theory couldn't be applied. I am unsure if it's because I lack the knowledge or if these things are just not possible to test right now. I went back and forth with ChatGPT for a very long time, longer than maybe I could have. And I'm quite familiar with the types of errors that AI usually does make. AI struggles most when the information given is wrong, vague, relies on human assumption, or is abstracted. This is why it doesn't do well with legal definitions and things like social sciences. But it can parse information and draw logical conclusions pretty well. Its problem arises when it has to make human assumptions to put information together. I was very thorough and very direct with my interactions with it. I did not allow any room for it to misinterpret me. And it didn't find any logical errors in my thinking, even when pressed to find them. So I would ask it deliberately to find something. And even when prompted and given the direction to find something wrong, it didn't. Not really, it didn't. Since I cannot undermine this theory in any meaningful way, I have compiled my answers to various difficult questions that were asked of me, which hopefully elaborates on how I'm understanding all of these things. The most difficult one was, if reality is fluid and constantly changing, what is reality actually made of? Good question. To that, I have to ask, what are subatomic particles made of? Do we know what these quantum fields even are? The answer is no, of course not. Not yet. But I had an idea. You just have to bear with me for a little bit. I had an idea that it's likely closely related to whatever empty space is. Sounds really dumb. Just give me like 5 seconds. What is empty space? If the black nothingness of space were truly nothing, then how come it's something that we can perceive? How come we can tell that there are places that are empty space? You know, I think it wouldn't be totally bizarre to think that maybe empty space is made of something and we just can't figure it out. We don't know yet. The second most difficult question is a spiritual one. If reality is fluid and shaped by our observations and beliefs, what happens after we die? I would say that this quantum stuff, whatever it is that makes up our consciousness, cannot be erased and cannot vanish due to laws of conservation that seem to persist even in quantum mechanics fields. So then the question is, well, what happens to it? If we look at various near-death and end-of-life experiences, people describe many different things that appear to vary based on both personal belief and knowledge. The prominent theory is that this is the brain rationalizing its own end, but I wonder, maybe that's not the case. What if it weren't the case? Assuming that our beliefs about ourselves shape our own reality, we can also assume that our beliefs about what happens after we die shape what happens to the quantum stuff left behind. What happens beyond this is anybody's guess. I'm not going to pretend to know. I can't know. But the logic is that this quantum stuff inside of our neurons can't simply disappear, and that our choice to believe in an afterlife is what manifests it. The third difficult question is one of morality. Where does morality fit into a universe where the end goal is self-observation? Interesting patterns start to emerge when you look into the idea of karma, that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. Sometimes within a admittedly comedic short amount of time. Why is this? If it felt like nothing but coincidence, then I don't think it would stand out as its own concept. There wouldn't be karmic justice, there wouldn't be karma if there wasn't something unusual about it. If we assume that the universe has already observed itself, and that this is the lucky reality simply because we exist right now, then we can also assume that the web of probabilities favored morality over chaos. Morality promotes harmony and progress, and this progress is a requirement if the universe is to observe itself. Timelines with more chaos, destruction, and bad actors were the realities that have already been removed from the potential futures. As a side note, there's an interesting phenomenon known as called the void. It is the weird morbid urge to do things that are wildly out of character most of the time, such as to jump off a cliff when you're standing too close to the edge, or to push someone who's standing too close. Probably the most common example people give. And these thoughts occur even if you know for a fact, definitively, you would never do anything like that. I started to wonder, well, why? Why do we feel these morbid urges? Maybe, perhaps, this is also a remnant of more chaotic timelines we experienced. In another timeline, maybe we did do those things, simply because the moral framework to prevent us from doing so was not solidified or not reinforced enough in those alternate timelines. Now, does this mean we're all horrible people? Not really, because the observed reality we live in now would be the only one that definitively happened. Everything else would be nothing more than a possibility, something that could have been had the world gone a different direction. If the truth can change, what is truth? I would argue that it's not like the truth can change as much as it wants, but that it's subject to change given enough time and intentional direction. Certain things can be regarded as truth because they are continually reinforced throughout time and have a very limited range of futures, to the point that it is likely only one potential future at all. If I place a cup on a table and forget about it, will it change? No, of course not, because the cup's reality is so far compounded that the only possible future for the cup is that it can't change. The materials it is made out of are inanimate and lack conscious intention, and it will not do anything unless an outside force acts on it. We have continually observed that certain materials are inert, inanimate. These materials do not carry consciousness. They will not change unless an outside force makes them change, and the cup can't do anything except be a cup. The cup has a very linear future, so linear that it can be considered the only future that cup will ever and can ever know. Do we have free will? We do in fact have free will, despite the inevitability of observing the universe. Just because the future has a predetermined direction does not mean that the future in its entirety is predetermined as well. It would be like tying a loose string between 2 points. Point A and point B are already chosen, but the middle part, where our paths flow, is subject to change. The string can move up and down and around and curve and do whatever the string wants to do, as long as it gets from point A to point B. Everyone is technically contributing to the reinforcement of reality, so there is plenty of room for personal choice when you really think about it. The major decisions, major breakthroughs, and world events are likely going to be the main driving force, while everybody else need only be witness to these changes. The mere act of observing change without attempting to hinder it means you've fulfilled this theoretical purpose. Anything else that you do is honestly up to you. If the universe encourages harmony and progress, what is the purpose of suffering? In creative writing, there's a saying that goes, "Suffering builds character." This is meant to mirror real-life suffering and the effect that real-life suffering has on people. It is true that some amounts of suffering expands perspective and improves the ability to empathize, which in turn promotes personal and societal growth. Suffering, in this case, is not only important, It is a necessary function of progress. Some people will inevitably experience more or less suffering compared to this probability, this mathematical optimal amount for sustained progress, due to the way that entropy works and due to natural variance. And we can't all experience the same amount of suffering because there's too much going on. You know, this variation, it sucks, but it means that suffering itself as a concept, it does serve a purpose. Now, the purpose of suffering is to facilitate growth, both personally and collectively. What is the purpose of love? This was an easy question, obviously. Love, whether it's romantic, familial, or platonic, serves to stabilize people by connecting them to each other. This stability promotes exploration. When people feel more grounded, they are more likely to be curious, try new things, and in the end, push progress forward. These bonds often encourage people to have more control over themselves, thus limiting unnecessary chaos, because they have loved ones who are invested in their lives and their well-being. Love is likely felt so strongly because it is unironically a key part of why human civilization is as stable as it is. The majority of people feel good benefiting friends, family, parents, children, and anybody or anything they feel love for. This places the emotion of love quite high on the hierarchy of emotions, possibly even at the top. How do you define who you are in a reality that's fluid? This was a very interesting question because in this case, your beliefs about yourself shape who you are internally. That's the logic. But what about externally? Your external reality becomes an intersection of how others perceive you and how you experience yourself. Since free will is real, you can choose to act within or outside of the expectations people have of you. People rightly assume that a person's choices reflect their inner experience. But perhaps the choices you make also alter your own inner experience in a meaningful way. An act of kindness towards a stranger creates a memory that you are a kind person. The more you do this, the more you reinforce your own existence as a kind person. If your inner world reflects this, then what happens is a type of, quantum harmony, something like that. The inner processes of your consciousness don't conflict with the way others perceive you or the way you see your own actions, so there is no contradiction to resolve. This means that being the person you truly are, or truly want to be, reduces the amount of internal chaos and grounds you firmly in reality. As a direct follow-up to the last question, what does it mean to not be yourself? I have met people who say one thing and do another, and I'm sure all of us either know or know of somebody like this. Why does this happen, and what effects can it have? I would call it the natural outcome of free will, but it is my personal belief that people who act in a way that contradicts their internal self are actively creating a type of chaos within themselves. Within this theoretical framework, observation shapes reality as we know it. So observations that contradict each other are inevitably going to cause more chaos. In the electron measuring experiment, the double slit experiment, Imagine trying to make two different observations about the electron at the same time. This is technically impossible. The electron must pick one path to exist as, but with two opposing observations dictating how the superposition will collapse. How can it exist cohesively at all? If we expand this thought experiment to our own identities, then this means that choosing to exist in direct opposition to your internal experience will introduce more chaos in our consciousnesses. This may be why people who do this experience more negative emotions, more chaotic thoughts, and more stress than a person who has aligned their external identity with their internal identity. Now, this doesn't mean that you can slowly morph into whatever kind of person you want to be. Obviously. Might be obvious, might not be. I have autism. And I cannot undo that no matter how hard I believe otherwise. It's baked into the physical structure of my brain and was brought into reality at my birth. I can't change this constraint, but I can choose how I live with it. Some of our circumstances are too fixed to change, but that doesn't mean you are incapable of making better choices for yourself. Some realities are just too foundational for one person to influence. What is the purpose of creativity? To properly address this, let me ask, where do new ideas come from? They don't come from doing nothing and thinking the same things every day. New ideas are a necessity in a timeline that is required to progress and reach self-observation. Humanity is as creative as it is because this is inherently advantageous to our progress. We express our creativity in numerous ways, and creativity is often rewarded, either through personal satisfaction or material benefit, or both. Many people enjoy sharing creativity, myself included, and this sharing is what allows ideas to be built up into these types of engines of change. A sense of creativity grounded in reality, as we know it, is guaranteed to be a net positive for both the universe and for the individual, regardless of whether that creativity is expressed through artistic means, discussion, or invention and innovation. If progress is so important, what is the purpose of destruction? This is also tricky, but as we have already mentioned, certain amounts of suffering promote growth. Suffering is a result of adversity, and adversity is a natural consequence of chaos or entropy. Without this adversity, there would be no meaning in growth. Without growth, there is no change. Now, it is weird to say that the world is experiencing an optimal amount of destruction and adversity for the sake of progress. But that's the theoretical truth that I'm left with. I don't think there's any other way to say that. Why are we commonly afraid of the unknown if the goal is progress? This question was tricky as well, because it feels counterintuitive to say that we are both afraid of the unknown and destined to seek it out. Why is this? I think it would be very reasonable to assume that some caution is useful when exploring the unknown. We are not so afraid of the unknown that we avoid it, but we also are not so fearless that we press onward without thinking about the consequences. It is highly likely that alternate universes where life was too cautious and not cautious enough did not reach the endpoint of universal self-observation. We experience a healthy level of caution and fear regarding the unknown because it is advantageous to safeguard ourselves from unforeseen consequences. What are memories? We experience memories as a recollection of the past, But we also forget that memories are proof of change. In order to observe change and build upon reality, it is necessary for us to be able to understand what has changed and how. Without these observations of the past, we cannot make the determination that anything has changed or make proper observations of what might come in the future. We need to be able to remember the route change is taken in order to have ideas of the future. If we can't make predictions about the future, then the future will never solidify. Can consciousness be artificially created? Theoretically, yes. If we rely on the idea that there is some level of quantum mechanics going on inside the neurons, we can also presume that the future study of these processes will be possible. It is my personal belief that consciousness probably relies quite heavily on these unknown quantum processes, but that's something that can only really be confirmed with time. If the truth is fluid, is there any merit in discovery? The answer may seem like it should be no, but in actuality, the very act of discovery is even more important than ever before. Each idea and discovery is adding onto reality and shaping the future as we understand it. Each idea has the potential to be brought into existence and become a part of the observable reality given enough time. Since manifesting things into reality just by wishing it has never been possible, we can also assume that these ideas are brought into existence over a long period of time, long enough to where it feels like these new discoveries are just sitting there out in the open, like it was always the case. The natural conclusion is that to enact change, it must occur over a period of time. Change is a constant, but it is not an instant. Also, if change were instant, it would be impossible to observe change at all. Any change enacted has to be observable over a period of time, otherwise it can't happen. You'll never know. I had an interesting question of my own that came to me while I was on a walk. What causes the distinct feeling that you were being watched? This sensation, it's hard to call a feeling, but it's something that everybody has experienced to some degree. You don't know how you know, but you can sense that somebody somewhere is watching you. This is universal. Everybody knows what you're talking about the moment you say that feeling of being watched. I thought that this is very weird, and it would make a lot more sense if giving someone your conscious attention has some kind of tangible influence on some part of reality. Because, what exactly are you feeling when you get this sense? I thought, well, what if this is actually caused by the same mechanism that causes the observer effect in lab experiments? I believe it's very possible, probable maybe even, I don't want to go that far, if merely observing something might have an effect in lab experiments, then perhaps the observer effect is a lot more tangible than we realize it is. After going through so many questions and looking at this from so many different angles, I had come to the realization that I didn't really just create a theory about how reality works. I had somehow found a way to give meaning to existence, life, and to personal agency above all else. And by the end, I felt more grounded than I had ever before. My life has meaning, it has purpose, and the choices I make are the ones that create the reality I will live in. Being who you truly are and who you truly want to be is the most powerful way to ground yourself in reality and in life. We may not like the idea of suffering being a necessity, but this also means that suffering is not without purpose. To face adversity and grow because of it is the essence of progress. And by simply existing and observing the change that happens all around you, you are fulfilling a purpose far greater than yourself. The things you see, think, and do are what reality is made of. Without you, without your thoughts and your ideas, without the memories people have of you and the connections you share with those people, reality has no form. To cap this off, I want to remind you that I do not believe the world is fake. I don't believe we are being held captive in a computer, and I don't believe that nothing we see is actually real, so it doesn't matter. The universe is very real, and the things we experience are just as real as we experience them to be. What I'm emphasizing is that the universe, and whatever stuff makes it up, is far more malleable than we might assume it to be. The world we live in is more adaptable than we give it credit for, and we are far more responsible for how we live than we might want to admit. I started because I was curious, and I ended with a completely different worldview. Maybe it sounds outlandish, maybe it's crazy, doesn't really matter, but it feels right to me. And even if you don't believe any of it, I hope that you can walk away with the knowledge that your best life is just waiting for you to choose it.